Hello everyone, and welcome back to the continuation of what is known as Mensteopathy. In this video we will be discovering and covering part 8 of the continuation of the concepts covered by Mensteopathy. In the previous video we discussed the most important aspect of this particular practice, which is a means of self-acceptance. In this particular video, we will now be covering the levels of consciousness, the levels of consciousness at which you find self-acceptance within organisms. And does this particular self-acceptance, the more self-aware an organism, the less self-acceptance it has towards itself. Now, in the analysis written in Hindu belief, specifically in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, one finds a particular notion of reincarnation, but also of particular teachings regarding the states of resonance which in matter we reincarnate in an ascensive pattern, an ascension of sorts, where through each reincarnation you are now actively climbing up a ladder, up a ascension of sorts. But now in this ascension we see that we go from earth levels of consciousness, which they themselves obey 7 different levels of consciousness, and at 7 they themselves as earth elements can obey human-like characteristics, which if you were now to look at the very chemicals and gases that which make the very foundation of matter, you will now see that they themselves have a human-like experience known as likes and dislikes that allows molecules to bind and mate together. Once you enter the higher level of the human experience of the earth elements, where you now see awareness in its characteristics of elements and its ability to create a binding of sorts, you then enter a plant life type of consciousness, which in itself has 7 different types of levels of consciousness, which at 7, once again, plant life can ascend to a more human-like experience, where you see now plants beginning to create motions to draw prey. And in the idea that from a plant life accepting or accentuating, ascending to a more human-like experience, you then enter the animal experience of things, which we as humans are in fact within the animal level of consciousness, which in itself has 7 layers, which most humans in a psychological analysis sit at typically about a 5 out of 7 in their level of self-awareness, where the 7 is now the full layer of human consciousness in our understanding of that particular consciousness. But then we enter the realm of ether, which in itself has layers of consciousness. Ether, you could imagine, is, as a result, you could say temperature, different extremes of chemical reactions, which in itself generates energy. And in the ether, in the energy system in itself is 7 different layers of consciousness. And you find this particular notion discussed within the Kabbalion, which in itself was written by Hermes Trismegistus, the scribe of the gods. Now, in understanding the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, which means 3 times large. In understanding the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, you then begin to see that beyond the ether, the ascension of humans continues. And we have actively created 7 different ascensions, which most humans have only experienced up until the 4th stage of the 5th layer of human consciousness. When you go further, you then enter the realm of spirit, where you then go into different layers of conscious manifestations of reality, where there is intelligent life forms that no longer obey a physical nature, but are illumined under a separate light. And in the understanding of where this illumination occurs, which is specifically caused by an oversaturation of neurotransmitters resulting in a processing of light spectrums to be perceivable in a different way, one then begins to enter the realm of spirit, the realm of light, which in itself has 7 layers of consciousness. So now if we were to imagine in the ascension of going from earth to plant to animal to ether to spirit to then finally the very last stage where you are the dreamer of your particular life, which means you are officially now in control of the entirety of this particular universe, if you wish. It begins the moment you take control of your life. And the idea of becoming a main character rather than a side character in your life story, you need to understand that in the archetypes discussed throughout all ancient mythologies, there speaks of deities beyond a human level of experience, deities in a world above. Imagine now in the dimensions, there are 7 known dimensions that which the highest has achieved in its leap of faith, in its ascension. And in the fall back down, you can only go as high up as you've fallen down. Which means now, if there are 7 dimensions in the upward direction, we must now see a mirror, which now you see 7 dimensions in the downward or in a downward motion, where you see Dante's 7 hells or 7 infernos, and now we begin to enter the 7 layers of heaven, where from the human experience, we then enter the experience of God, a wisdom. From God, you then enter the experience of a Titan. From a Titan, you then experience the level known as a celestial. And from a celestial, you then enter the realm known as the final stage of heaven, where you begin to ascend the throne as the dreamer of reality. And in this depth of insanity, you might feel a certain pull in your heart, because you yourself can understand as a viewer in the experience of consciousness, which is of highs and lows, inducing a substance that creates a high results in you going up in the ascension in your experience, whereas using a substance that creates a down or a downer results in your experience going in the opposite direction in your experience. We now see that in the experiences of different substances, the more powerful an up is, the further down the reverse effect in your rebalancing of the hangover, or also known as the aftermath. The higher up in one stimulant you go, the further down your mental health will then result or react for the next rebalancing cycle. And the understanding that now the further down you go, the further up the next day your mental health will rebalance out. In this process, you begin to understand that human consciousness functions as a result of substances. They are an external source of neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin, which not only regulate our moods, they also affect the level at which we process reality. And if we have an oversaturation of serotonin, you will process reality at a much greater potential rate, known as an ascension. And the lower you reduce your dopamine, the further in the reverse you descend into the depression through the hells. Now, in the discussion of this particular video, I want to specifically touch on the subjects regarding where self-acceptance leads to these conclusions. If the levels of consciousness we experience is as a result of substance use, which itself could be stimulated through starvation, which starvation creates a similar experience as a psychoactive substance over time, which now when we see the story of Moses, who famined or specifically chose to not eat for 40 days and 40 nights after crossing the Red Sea. He then wrote the 10 Commandments upon encountering the commandments of God. Starvation and substance use result in what is known as a psychosis. You also experience psychosis through other stimulus, such as concussions. Anything that creates a change or a drastic shift in the way the brain must now learn to re-regulate itself based on the things it is either taking or not taking. And this psychosis of rebalancing itself out now, because that is what psychosis is. It's the brain's process of rebalancing itself out. And in the rebalancing itself out aspect of things, you now begin to see where we see instability. Instability is caused by the inability to understand the experience of the mind. If we cannot understand the mind, then I would suggest we stop abusing substances. But in the healing aspect of things, it is at the core root. We see in psychiatry today that treatments are given to patients according to where they place themselves on the psychiatry scale of up or down, based on which day they feel their cycle recreates itself every 28 days. And so they've created certain concoctions of treatments for certain patients that differ from day to day to day to day. Because each different day they have analyzed that in that particular person's 28-day psychoanalysis, these particular patterns reoccur on these particular different days of that particular person's mental cycle. The problem in that notion, as yes, drugs create the mind. The only problem now is the act of using psychiatry, which is in essence has a beauty to the idea of helping a person, but in their treatments are going about it the wrong way, because rather than taking the emotion that resulted in the thought, resulting in the emotional distress disorder known as a mental condition, we are now seeing we're trying to take the thought and cut it or remove it from the person. The problem is the emotion is still there. It's simply the thought process where the person no longer has the ability to comprehend their own emotions anymore. And we begin to see something build up such as serotonin syndrome, an oversaturation of serotonin that eventually results in the death of the individual, whether it be through suicidal idealization, depression, or even something as simple as their heart exploding due to the treatments we are giving these people, which alter the physiology, the physical. The moment you alter the chemical process of a body's process in its natural effect, you are now effectively stunting that particular function in the body, which if you do not continuously supplement, not only does it stop working, but it will never work again unless if you rehabilitate that particular function, which is where we arrive in Mensteopathy. It is the idea of creating a rehabilitation of the emotion and how it is processed, which then results in a transfer or alchemical transfer process, where through alchemy you are shifting the states of your mental resonance from one emotion to another, and you're actively canceling the thought process that results in your behavior, resulting in your downward spiral as an individual. And the idea of mental health, mental disorders are as a cause or an effect. Mental disorders are caused as a result of the effect of emotion and emotional stress disorders, where people through such things as PTSD, where it is not the previous self that is not willing to let go of you, it is, let me reword that one more time. It is not yourself that is not willing to let go of the previous self. It is the previous self not willing to let go of you in PTSD. And in PTSD, you see the obsessiveness over things that create traumatic responses. It is a hypersensitivity to external stimulus, which if this person through PTSD suffers too much stimulus, their brain becomes now their biggest fear. And in the fear of people with PTSD, they themselves will experience, once again, a psychosis. And the idea of changing the way we process our emotions, We change the way we process our thoughts, and we change the way we behave. It is simply a manner of pulling the perspective to a higher, greater height. And the change of perspective is the goal of Mensteopathy. The moment you learn to accept yourself, you gain a perspective over the rest. Thank you for listening. Until next time.